Alright, let's talk about one of the most ruthless, cunning, and outright terrifying factions in Warhammer 40k, the Drukhari Kabals. These guys aren't just another band of space pirates. They're a lethal mix of crime syndicate, warrior cult, and noble house, all wrapped in a society that thrives on pain, treachery, and pure, undiluted sadism. No honor, no mercy, no grand ideals, just an endless hunger for power and suffering. But what really makes the Cabal so dangerous? How strong are they, really? If you want to understand just how powerful the Drukhari Kabals are, you need to know where they came from, because they weren't always the terrifying warlords of Kamara. In fact, once upon a time, there were no Cabals at all, just remnants of a broken civilization clawing for survival in the shadows of their own downfall. Before the Cabals, the Drukhari elite were the noble houses of the Aldari Empire. These weren't just any aristocrats. They were the rulers of a civilization so advanced, so powerful, that it could shape entire worlds with a thought. But the Aldari became too powerful, too decadent, and too obsessed with pleasure. Their society rotted from within, and then came the fall, the birth of Slaanesh. The Aldari homeworlds were consumed in a psychic apocalypse, and the survivors either fled to the craft worlds, embracing discipline and asceticism, or they found refuge in the Webway, where the city of Kamara awaited. The problem: the Drukhari who settled in Kamara didn't learn a damn thing from the mistakes of their ancestors. They didn't reform, they didn't change. They doubled down on their old ways, indulging in cruelty and excess, but now with a desperate edge. See, unlike the craft world Aldari, who found a way to keep their souls out of Slaanesh's grasp, the Drukhari had no such safety net. They were still prey to she who thirsts, and the only way to stave off their inevitable fate was through suffering, other people's suffering. The more pain and terror they caused, the more they could replenish their own withering souls. At first, Kamara was ruled by the same noble houses that had led the Aldari into destruction. They thought they could hold on to their old ways, ruling by bloodlines and privilege. But they underestimated one man, Asdrubal Vect. A former slave who saw exactly how rotten the system was, Vect didn't just want to join the ruling class. He wanted to burn it to the ground and rebuild it in his image. And that's exactly what he did. Vect orchestrated a revolution unlike anything Kamara had ever seen. He didn't just assassinate his enemies. He manipulated them into destroying each other. He played the noble houses against each other, watched as they tore themselves apart, and when the dust settled, he unveiled his new order, the Kabalite system. Instead of being born into power, you had to take it. Bloodlines didn't matter anymore, only strength, cunning, and the ability to outlast your enemies. The Cabals were born out of chaos, and they thrived in it. Instead of noble houses ruling over Kamara, now the city was controlled by warbands, militarized factions led by archons, each one a predator ready to sink their teeth into anyone who showed weakness. Power was no longer inherited. It was something you fought for, killed for, and more often than not, died for. This shift wasn't just about politics. It made the Drukhari stronger. Without the stagnation of hereditary rule, Kamara became a place where only the most ruthless could survive. The Cabals became the true power of the Dark City, and under Vect's watchful eye, they spread their influence across the galaxy. But while the Cabals gave the Drukhari a new way to rule, they also turned their society into an unending battlefield. Because when everyone is fighting for power, no one is ever truly safe. If there's one thing you need to understand about the Drukhari Kabals, it's that they exist in a state of constant tension. Power in Kamara isn't just fragile, it's like a blade balanced on a razor's edge, and every Archon knows that the second they let their guard down, someone is waiting to push them off. The Cabals might be the dominant force in the Dark City, but they are anything but stable. Their strength comes from their ability to navigate a society built on treachery, assassination, and shifting alliances that can turn deadly in an instant. At the very top of a Cabal's hierarchy is the Archon, the undisputed ruler, the mastermind behind every scheme, and usually the most dangerous individual in the entire faction. But being an Archon is a nightmare. It's not enough to get power. You have to hold it, and that means living in a state of permanent paranoia. Every lieutenant is a potential usurper, every ally is a future rival, and even the most trusted bodyguard is only waiting for the right moment to switch sides. Archons don't trust anyone, and for good reason. The history of the Cabals is littered with rulers who were betrayed by their own inner circle, sometimes in ways so elaborate that they make imperial coups look like petty office politics. Directly beneath the Archon are the Drakons, the second-in-command officers who lead Cabalite forces into battle and manage the day-to-day operations of the faction. If you're a Drakon, your entire career is basically a waiting game. Bide your time, gain favor with the right people, and when the moment is perfect, stab your boss in the back and take their place. But it's a dangerous game, because Archons know exactly what their Drakons are thinking, and the punishment for a failed coup is always excruciatingly creative. Further down the hierarchy, you've got the Cabalite warriors, the backbone of every Cabal, and some of the deadliest infantry in the galaxy. Every one of these warriors is a predator, trained in the art of ranged combat, ambush tactics, and the kind of cruelty that would make an Imperial commissar break out in a cold sweat. They fight not just to conquer, but to savor the suffering of their enemies, drawing out every kill to feed their own dark hunger. But even at this level, no one is truly safe. Any warrior who shows too much promise risks catching the attention of a superior who might decide they're a threat that needs eliminating. At the absolute bottom are the half-born, Drukhari who weren't born naturally, but were instead grown in artificial gestation vats. To the noble trueborn, these vat-grown warriors are seen as disposable cannon fodder, useful only as expendable muscle for raids and battles. But some of the most ambitious Drukhari rise from these ranks, proving that ruthlessness, not birthright, is what really matters in Camera. Then there's the Court of the Archon, a nightmarish collection of bodyguards, assassins, and grotesque alien creatures that serve as an Archon's personal entourage. Some Archons prefer elite warriors like the Incubi, silent, merciless killers clad in black armor, while others surround themselves with more exotic horrors like Sleeth, serpentine xenos with incredible reflexes, or Medusae, parasitic entities that can induce psychic comas with a single gaze. The court isn't just for protection, it's a message. If you're an Archon and your inner circle is that terrifying, it means you don't just survive in Camera, you thrive. The irony of this whole structure is that it actually makes the Cabals stronger. By ensuring that only the most devious, bloodthirsty, and paranoid individuals ever rise to power, Camera has created an ecosystem where only the best survive. This system weeds out the weak, and in a way, that's the ultimate strength of the Cabals. There are no unworthy rulers, no incompetent generals, no nepotistic heirs who coast by on their family name. If you're at the top, you earned it, probably by killing everyone who stood in your way. But this also means the Cabals are always on edge. No Archon rules forever, and no Cabal is ever truly united. Internal betrayals are as common as external wars, and the same cutthroat mentality that makes the Drukhari so dangerous also ensures that their greatest enemy will always be themselves. If you think the Drukhari Kabals are dangerous inside Camera, just wait until they set their sights on real space. Because as terrifying as they are in the Dark City, it's out in the void, on the battlefields of the material realm, where their true strength is put on display. Unlike the lumbering Imperial war machines or the mindless hordes of the Tyranids, the Drukhari don't fight wars in the traditional sense. They don't conquer planets or hold territory. They don't wage campaigns of attrition or throw endless bodies at a problem. The Cabals fight like shadows, striking hard and fast, then vanishing before anyone can react. Every raid is precise. Every battle is orchestrated like a perfect symphony of pain and terror. And make no mistake, terror is just as much a weapon for them as their blades and blasters. Real space raids are the lifeblood of the Cabals. They aren't just for sport, though the Drukhari definitely enjoy the slaughter. These attacks serve a very real, very practical purpose. The Drukhari need suffering to survive. The agony of their victims replenishes their withered souls, keeping them from becoming lifeless husks consumed by Slaanesh. And the best way to ensure a fresh supply of pain? A never-ending campaign of piracy, abductions, and wholesale butchery across the stars. Each cabal has its own approach to raiding. Some, like the Cabal of the Flayed Skull, specialize in airborne assaults, launching devastating strikes from fleets of razor-wing jet fighters and venoms before the enemy even knows what's happening. Others, like the Cabal of the Shuddering Blade, prefer to get up close and personal, reveling in the carnage of melee combat. Then you have outliers like the Cabal of the 13th Whisper, whose raids are so drenched in supernatural horror that survivors whisper of shadows coming to life and slaughtering entire settlements before fading into the dark. But no matter the method, the result is always the same: death, destruction, and a wave of psychological trauma that lingers long after the Cabals have disappeared. There's a reason entire planets live in fear of the Drukhari. Unlike Chaos warbands, who might corrupt a world over decades, or orc hordes, who simply smash everything in their path, the Drukhari strike without warning. One day, your planet is peaceful. The next, the skies are black with barbed ships, and the streets are painted with blood. And when the Cabals leave, they don't just take resources or technology, they take people. This is what truly sets the Cabals apart, their ability to break a population, not just physically, but psychologically. They don't just kill, they make sure everyone left behind wishes they were dead. Entire planetary governments have collapsed from the sheer terror of knowing the Drukhari could return at any moment. Imperial worlds have been abandoned, not because they were destroyed, but because the people refused to live under the constant shadow of fear. And it's not just isolated colonies that fall victim to the Cabals. Even the most fortified planets, the ones with planetary defense grids, standing armies, and fleets in orbit, aren't safe. The Drukhari don't engage in traditional siege warfare. They infiltrate, using the webway to bypass defenses entirely. An entire hive city might wake up to find its noble houses slaughtered overnight, its leaders replaced by lifelike husks that bleed out the moment someone touches them. Even the Imperium's finest warriors have fallen prey to Cabalite trickery. Space Marine chapters have lost entire strike forces to the Cabals, their warriors captured and dragged into Kamara to fight in endless gladiatorial pits. The Black Templars once waged an entire crusade of vengeance against the Cabal of the Poisoned Heart after one of their chapter keeps was wiped out in a single night, and not a single recruit was ever found. The White Scars, known for their speed and mobility, found themselves outmaneuvered by the Cabal of the Bloodied Talon, losing their chapter master in the process. And the Raven Guard, masters of stealth, discovered firsthand that the Drukhari are better at it. But here's the terrifying part. The Cabals don't need to win every battle. They don't have to destroy entire armies or wipe out enemy fleets. They just have to take what they came for and leave. They don't fight wars of conquest. They fight wars of extraction. The more chaos they spread, the more fear they instill, the more power they gain. And they never stop. There is no grand strategy, no final goal, no point at which the Cabals will have enough. Kamara is built on suffering, and suffering is a resource that can never run dry. The raids will always continue. The slaves will always scream. The Cabals will always be hunting, because the moment they stop, they start dying. That's the terrifying strength of the Drukhari Kabals. They aren't fighting to win. They're fighting because it's the only way they can survive. And in a galaxy where most factions dream of an endgame, be it the Imperium's eternal rule, Chaos's dominion, or the Tyranids consuming all, the Drukhari are unique, because their nightmare never ends. If you thought the Drukhari Kabals were ruthless when dealing with outsiders, you haven't seen anything until you look at how they treat each other. You'd think that being part of a cabal, a highly organized, militarized syndicate, would give you some level of protection, maybe even a sense of belonging. Wrong. There's no safety in a cabal, no real loyalty, no camaraderie. Just a constant simmering tension where everyone is waiting for the perfect moment to betray or be betrayed. This is what makes the cabals both terrifying and fascinating. Unlike most military forces, where structure and unity are key to success, Drukhari power comes from controlled chaos. The moment a cabal becomes too stable, it starts to stagnate, and stagnation is death in Kamara. Every Archon knows this, which is why they encourage the endless backstabbing, double-dealing, and treachery that define their factions. A cabal isn't just a military force, it's a battlefield in itself. And this goes all the way to the top. The Archon, the so-called ruler of the Cabal, is always one bad day away from getting a knife in the back. Sure, they hold absolute power, for now. But the second they start slipping, the second they show even a moment of weakness, their Drakens and lieutenants are already whispering, already forming alliances, already deciding who gets to wear their skin next. It's an unspoken rule of Kamara. If you can take power, you should. But this isn't some mindless bloodbath where people randomly kill each other in the streets. No, no, no. The Drukhari play a much smarter game. Open assassination is messy, and it draws too much attention. The true masters of Kamara eliminate their rivals through careful, deliberate scheming. Poison slipped into a favorite vintage, a trusted advisor revealed to be a double agent, a seemingly minor political maneuver that leaves an Archon isolated and vulnerable. This isn't just about survival, it's art. And the Cabals themselves? They're in a never-ending Cold War. There are no alliances in Kamara, only temporary ceasefires. Every Cabal is constantly watching its rivals, looking for the right moment to strike. Even when two Cabals work together, on a raid for example, you can bet that at least one of them is already planning to backstab the other the second they get what they need. Take the Cabal of the Black Heart, the oldest and most powerful Cabal, led by the infamous Asdrubal Vect. The only reason it has remained at the top for so long is because Vect has turned paranoia into an art form. He knows every scheme before it even begins. He plays his rivals against each other like a maestro conducting a symphony of destruction. And when he finally moves against an enemy, it's effortless, because they've already lost before they even realized they were in danger. But even the might of the Black Heart doesn't prevent the constant infighting that defines Kamara. Cabals wage shadow wars, setting up elaborate traps that can take centuries to execute. A single whispered rumor in the right place can spark a decade-long conflict between two factions, and by the time they realize they've been played, the mastermind behind it has already moved on to their next target. And here's the thing. This system actually works. It keeps the Cabals strong. The moment someone gets complacent, they get removed. The moment a Cabal grows too powerful, the others unite just long enough to drag it back down. There's no room for mediocrity. Only the most ruthless, the most cunning, the most terrifying individuals survive. That's what makes the Cabals so dangerous. They aren't just fighting the galaxy, they're fighting each other all the time, and that constant struggle hones them into something truly monstrous. There's no place for weakness in Kamara. You either adapt to the endless game of blood and betrayal, or you disappear. The Drukhari Kabals don't just survive in their endless cycle of treachery, they thrive on it. And nowhere is their strength more obvious than in the way they wage war. Because make no mistake, these aren't just a bunch of backstabbing aristocrats playing political games. When the Cabals go to battle, they become something else entirely. Something precise, merciless, and unstoppable. Unlike the clumsy, grinding warfare of the Imperium or the brutal, overwhelming force of the Orcs, Drukhari tactics are built on speed, deception, and psychological devastation. A Kabalite strike force doesn't roll onto a battlefield like a tank column. It erupts from the shadows, delivering pinpoint destruction before vanishing like a nightmare that never should have existed in the first place. By the time their enemies even realize they're under attack, it's already too late. The core of their power lies in their superior technology. The Cabals may be a cruel, fractured society, but when it comes to weaponry and vehicles, they operate on a level most other factions can only dream of. Their skimmers, raiders, venoms, and ravagers glide effortlessly through the air, capable of weaving through cityscapes and enemy fire with impossible agility. The Imperium's tanks might have thick armor, but what good is armor when your enemy never stands still long enough to be hit? And then there are their weapons. Imperial Guard troops carry solid projectile guns. Space Marines rely on explosive bolter rounds. The Drukhari? They use weapons designed for pain, not just death. Splinter rifles don't just kill you, they fill your bloodstream with hypertoxic venom that makes you feel every single second of your body shutting down. Dark lances don't just punch through armor, they reduce anything they hit to a screaming cloud of disintegrated molecules. Even their melee weapons are nightmares. A Cabalite warrior with an agonizer can take down a Terminator not by cutting through its armor, but by sending pain so intense through the suit that the Astartes inside dies from sheer agony. But what truly makes them terrifying isn't just their weapons, it's how they fight. The Cabals never engage in stand-up battles if they can help it. If you're fighting Drukhari in a fair fight, congratulations. You're fighting the dumbest Cabal in history, because the smart ones never let you fight them on your terms. They specialize in hit-and-run tactics, striking where the enemy is weakest, cutting them apart piece by piece, and then fading away before any counterattack can be mustered. Even the best Imperial commanders struggle to deal with this. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't hold ground, that doesn't need supply lines, that appears out of nowhere, takes exactly what it wants, and then vanishes into the webway before your reinforcements arrive? A full-strength Space Marine company can chase a Drukhari Kabal all they want, but the Cabals decide when and where battles happen, and they never let themselves be pinned down. And this isn't just about practicality. The Drukhari enjoy this kind of warfare. Every raid is an opportunity for cruelty, every battle a chance to revel in an enemy's suffering. They could just vaporize a city from orbit, but why waste the fun? Instead, they disable defenses, cut communications, and let panic fester. They want their victims to run, to beg, to hope for survival before snatching it away. But this kind of combat doesn't just make them terrifying to the galaxy at large. It also makes them nearly impossible to wipe out. Cabals don't have central strongholds that can be besieged. They have hidden fortresses, secret webway access points, entire backup cities deep within the labyrinthine dark of Kamara. Even if an enemy somehow manages to strike back, even if they destroy a Cabal's main forces, there's always another wave of Drukhari waiting in the wings, ready to rebuild, regroup, and strike again. And then there's the real space raids, which are a whole other level of strategic genius. These aren't just about taking slaves or causing mayhem, though they certainly do both. Every Cabal raid weakens their enemies without risking themselves. They cut apart defenses, sabotage supply lines, and force their foes to waste resources fortifying against an enemy that might not even come back for years. The Drukhari can cripple an entire sector without ever engaging in an actual war. That's what makes them so dangerous. Unlike most factions, they don't need to win battles to be victorious. The Imperium has to hold planets, chaos has to corrupt them, the Tyranids have to devour them. The Drukhari, they just need to keep striking, over and over again, bleeding their enemies dry one raid at a time. And the worst part? There's nothing anyone can do to stop them. When it comes to the strongest Cabals in Kamara, the power dynamics aren't just about raw military strength. It's not about who has the most warriors or the deadliest weapons, though those things certainly help. True power in the Dark City comes from control, from cunning, and from knowing exactly when to strike and when to disappear into the shadows. And if there's one Cabal that has mastered this game beyond all others, it's the Cabal of the Black Heart. The Cabal of the Black Heart, the unquestioned apex. If Kamara had a true ruler, besides sheer chaos, it would be Asdrubal Vect. His Cabal of the Black Heart isn't just the oldest and largest Cabal in existence. It's the foundation upon which the entire Drukhari power structure is built. Vect didn't just survive in Kamara's endless bloodbath. He rewrote the rules to ensure no one could ever threaten him. The Black Heart's strength isn't just in its numbers, though to be clear, they have millions of warriors at their disposal. It's in their web of influence. Vect has informants, spies, and double agents in every Cabal, every witch cult, every homunculus coven, and probably in a few Imperial offices too. Nothing happens in Kamara without him knowing. Nothing. And here's the thing. No one dares move against the Black Heart. Not because they don't want to, but because they know what happens to those who try. Every attempt to overthrow Vect has ended in catastrophe, often in ways so elaborate that even the most paranoid Archons are left in stunned silence. Cabals don't just fear Vect. They fear that he already knows what they're planning before they even do. But while the Black Heart is the dominant Cabal, they aren't the only powerhouse in Kamara. There are a few others that have managed to carve out their own terrifying legacies, each in their own way. The Cabal of the Poison Tongue, masters of manipulation. If there's one Cabal that almost plays the game as well as Vect, it's the Cabal of the Poison Tongue. Led by the brilliant and ruthless Lady Malice, this Cabal thrives not on brute force, but on deception. They don't just fight with weapons, they fight with words. They're masters of intrigue, able to manipulate their enemies into destroying themselves while they sit back and watch. Lady Malice herself is one of the most fascinating figures in Kamara. She's rumored to have some otherworldly connection to an unknown patron, and there are whispered theories that she might be one of the few beings in the galaxy who could actually challenge Vect. But she's too smart to try, at least yet. Instead, she's made sure that her Cabal is woven so deeply into Kamara's political web that removing her would send the entire city into chaos. And the thing about the Poison Tongue? No one trusts them, not even their allies, because they have a reputation for turning even their closest friends into pawns in their schemes. If you find yourself working alongside them, you'd better be very sure that you're not the next piece on their chessboard. The Cabal of the Flayed Skull, masters of the sky. If the Black Heart rules through fear and the Poison Tongue through manipulation, then the Cabal of the Flayed Skull rules through pure, unrelenting speed and firepower. Unlike most Cabals, who prefer ambushes and subterfuge, the Flayed Skull goes to war like a storm ripping through a battlefield. Led by Archon Vraisk, a former Reaver-turned-Cabalite overlord, this faction is all about aerial supremacy. Their fleets of razor-wing jet fighters, venoms, and raiders are the best in Kamara, and when they strike, they come in waves, overwhelming firepower delivered from every possible angle. The Flayed Skull once conquered an entire planet without a single Drukhari touching the ground. They obliterated defenses from orbit, sowed chaos with low-altitude strafing runs, and by the time their enemies even had a chance to react, the planet was theirs. That's the kind of precision destruction they bring to every battlefield. But there's a downside to their power. The Flayed Skull is fast, but they aren't the most subtle. They rely on shock and awe, and if they ever get bogged down in a long fight, their advantages start to disappear. That's why they pick their battles carefully, making sure that by the time the enemy even thinks about a counterattack, they're already gone. The Cabal of the Obsidian Rose. The Weapon Masters. Now, if you're talking about firepower, there's no Cabal that comes close to the Cabal of the Obsidian Rose. These guys don't just use weapons, they create them. Their Archon, Istrachromis, is a legendary weaponsmith, and every piece of war gear that bears her mark is perfection. The Obsidian Rose is unique because they control the greatest forges in Kamara. They supply many of the other Cabals with arms, and that gives them a dangerous kind of leverage. After all, if every other Cabal relies on you for weapons, they're going to think twice before coming after you. That said, the Obsidian Rose is also a target. The moment they show any weakness, the other Cabals will pounce, hoping to steal their technology for themselves. That's why Istra Kramis rules with an iron fist, ensuring that her cabal is always armed to the teeth and ready for war. The Cabal of the Dying Sun, the Apocalypse Bringers. If you think the cabals we've covered so far are bad, you haven't seen anything until you hear about the Cabal of the Dying Sun. These guys claim to have the ability to extinguish stars. And the terrifying thing? That might not be just a bluff. Led by the enigmatic Archon Vorl Zolanth, this cabal is obsessed with ancient Aeldari artifacts, specifically the kind that can destroy entire worlds. They operate in the shadows, rarely engaging in open battle, but when they do strike, they leave devastation in their wake. Their stronghold, the Pinnacle of Disdain, is said to house forbidden weapons, relics from the old Eldari Empire, some of which might actually be capable of wiping out entire solar systems. They don't use them often, because even in Kamara, that kind of power draws too much attention. But just knowing that they could, that alone is enough to make other cabals tread carefully around them. So, who's the strongest? It's obvious that the Cabal of the Black Heart reigns supreme. No one comes close to matching Vex's sheer level of control and influence. But that doesn't mean the other cabals aren't dangerous. The Poison Tongue is playing the long game. The Flayed Skull dominates the skies. The Obsidian Rose has a death grip on Kamara's war industry, and the Dying Sun might have the firepower to end entire civilizations. The balance of power in Kamara is always shifting, always unstable. But one thing is certain: whoever rules the Cabals rules the Dark City. And in a society where only the strong survive, that's a position everyone is willing to kill for. The Drukhari Kabals don't exist in isolation. Sure, they think they're above the rest of the galaxy, looking down on the lesser races like a cat toying with a dying mouse. But the reality? They have enemies everywhere. No faction in the galaxy trusts them. No one likes them. And the few that work with them do so knowing full well that they could be betrayed at any moment. So how do the Cabals actually interact with the rest of the 40K universe? Are they powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the Imperium? Can they match the unrelenting horror of the Tyranids or the sheer brutality of the Orcs? Well, it's complicated. The Cabals don't play by the same rules as other factions. They don't conquer, they don't hold territory, and they don't fight fair. And that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. If there's one faction that suffers the most at the hands of the Cabals, it's the Imperium. The sheer scale of humanity means that no matter how many worlds the Drukhari raid, there are always more. More planets to plunder, more defenseless civilians to enslave, more terrified souls to drag screaming into Kamara. The Imperium hates the Drukhari, but here's the problem: they can't do anything about them. The Cabals don't fight open wars. They don't give the Imperium big, obvious targets to destroy. They strike from the shadows, vanish into the webway, and leave the Imperium scrambling to respond to an enemy that's already gone. That's why even the might of the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's Angels of Death, struggles against them. Space Marines are trained for direct combat, for overwhelming firepower, for righteous retribution. But when they arrive to fight the Drukhari, they're usually too late. The enemy is already gone, and all that's left is an empty, blood-soaked ruin. The Imperium has waged countless campaigns against the Cabals, but the problem is that they never end. The Cabals don't have homeworlds to invade. Kamara is untouchable, hidden deep within the webway. The only way to truly defeat the Drukhari is to eradicate them all, and that's just not possible. The Drukhari might be Eldari by blood, but their relationship with their craft-world cousins is, let's say, complicated. To put it bluntly, the craft-world Eldari see the Drukhari as a disgrace, a shameful reminder of everything that led to the fall. And the Drukhari? They see the craft-worlders as weak, clinging to ancient traditions instead of embracing the true nature of their race. Every time the craft-worlds and the Cabals cross paths, there's violence. The Asuryani try to save their lost kin, but the Drukhari don't want to be saved. The Cabals raid craft-world outposts, abduct exodites for sport, and mock the very idea that their cousins think they're better than them. The Harlequins, though? That's a different story. If there's one group the Cabals are willing to work with, it's the Laughing God's servants. The Harlequins weave in and out of Kamara freely, passing between Cabals like they own the place, because, well, they kind of do. The Drukhari respect them, not out of loyalty, but because even they don't fully understand what the Harlequins are up to, and that uncertainty makes them careful. The Cabals despise chaos, and for good reason. The Drukhari have spent millennia escaping the clutches of Slaanesh, and the last thing they want is to deal with demon-worshipping lunatics who think throwing their souls into the warp is a great idea. That being said, the Cabals are pragmatic. They've been known to trade with Chaos forces, selling captured slaves, weapons, and even their own mercenary services in exchange for whatever twisted currency is being offered. The key is to never let the warp get too close, because the moment the Cabals start dabbling too much in chaos, they risk something worse than death, being dragged screaming into She Who Thirst's embrace. Of course, some Cabals have been corrupted. There are whispers of Drukhari warbands who have fallen to chaos, abandoning their careful avoidance of the warp in favor of raw power. But they don't last. The second a Cabal starts messing with chaos, the others unite long enough to wipe it out. Because if there's one thing the Drukhari can agree on, it's that Slaanesh must never get a foothold in Kamara. If there's one faction the Drukhari absolutely hate raiding, it's the Orcs. Because let's be honest, raiding an orc-infested world is just asking for trouble. First, Orcs are too resilient. The Drukhari prefer enemies that scream, beg, and collapse in despair. Orcs? They just laugh. You can torture them all you want, but half the time, they just enjoy it. You burn down their settlements, and they just build new ones. And worst of all, the moment the Cabals start raiding Orcs, the Orcs want revenge. And when an Orc war boss decides to go after you, he doesn't just leave when the fight is over. He keeps coming. That's why most Cabals avoid Orcs unless they absolutely have to. Sure, they can take them on. Drukhari speed and tactics let them outmaneuver any greenskin force, but the risk is often too high. It's just not worth it. If the Cabals hate the Orcs, then they fear the Tyranids, because for all their cruelty and power, the Drukhari need living victims to sustain themselves. And the Tyranids? They don't feel pain. They don't break. They don't suffer. They don't fear. You can't torture them. You can't break them. And worse, the Tyranids adapt. If a Cabal fights them once, the next time the hive mind will know their tactics. Cabals that have gotten too close to the Tyranids have simply disappeared, swallowed whole by an enemy that doesn't care about their clever tricks. Some Archons have tried to experiment on Tyranids, hoping to find new ways to harvest pain from them. So far, every attempt has ended in disaster. The few Drukhari who managed to capture Tyranid bioforms quickly realized they were in over their heads. The creatures broke free, slaughtered everything in sight, and sometimes even lured the rest of the Hive fleet to Kamara itself. So where do the Cabals stand? The Cabals aren't the strongest force in the galaxy, not in the traditional sense. They don't have the numbers of the Imperium, the unkillable brutality of the Orcs, or the galaxy-devouring hunger of the Tyranids. But what they do have is precision, cunning, and the ability to strike and vanish at will. No one wants to go to war with the Cabals, not because they can't be beaten, but because fighting them is a never-ending nightmare. You don't defeat the Drukhari. You survive them if you're lucky. And that's what makes them one of the most terrifying forces in the entire galaxy. If you want proof of just how dangerous the Cabals are, you don't have to look far. Throughout the millennia, they've left a trail of devastation across the galaxy, carving their legend in blood and terror. Their strength isn't measured in conquered worlds or held territory. It's in the stories, the nightmares, the whispered warnings passed down through generations of survivors. Because when the Drukhari strike, there is no warning, no mercy, and no salvation. But while they've orchestrated some of the most horrifying raids in history, they've also suffered their fair share of disasters. No force is invincible, not even the Cabals. And sometimes, the same arrogance, cruelty, and internal treachery that make them so feared are also what lead to their downfall. If you ever want a textbook example of how the Cabals operate, look no further than Durandus II. In 626.M41, the Cabal of the Baleful Gaze and the Witch Cult of the Wrath Unbound carried out one of the most devastating real space raids ever recorded. It started with haywire bombing runs, entire cities plunged into permanent darkness, their technology and defenses shut down instantly. No communication, no transportation, just silence. And then, the Hounds were released. Packs of chimerae and clawed fiends were loosed upon the streets, their monstrous shrieks echoing through the dead zones of the ruined cities. The Astra Militarum did their best to hold back the tide, but with their weapons useless, they were nothing but prey. By the time the Drukhari warbands emerged, the defenders were already broken, running for their lives, trying to escape the horrors hunting them through the darkened ruins. And that's when the true massacre began. The remaining Imperial forces and civilians were herded like cattle into the Grand Templum district, where the real show awaited them. The beast masters of Kamara watched with twisted delight as their creatures tore into the helpless masses, turning the capital into an open-air blood sport. The Drukhari didn't just win that battle. They rewrote the history of the planet in blood. Not a single human survived. To this day, Durandus remains a ghost world. The Imperium never reclaimed it. There's nothing left to reclaim. But not every Cabal raid ends in triumph. And sometimes, the hunters become the hunted. That's exactly what happened in 865.M41, when the Cabal of the Black Blade fell into a trap of their own making. They thought they were launching a routine raid on the imperial city of Heraclad. Easy prey. A soft world waiting to be ripped apart. But when they arrived, something was wrong. The streets were empty. The city was too quiet. There were no civilians, no panicked screams, no helpless victims waiting to be taken. Just shadows. And then the shadows moved. The Raven Guard were waiting. Not just any force, but the 1st and 6th companies of the Emperor's own sons of stealth and vengeance. The Drukhari had walked into a slaughterhouse. The ambush was perfectly executed. Before the Cabal even had a chance to react, Thunderhawks screamed through the sky, cutting off their escape. Land speeders, faster than even the Drukhari skimmers, pinned them down, forcing them into direct combat, something the Cabals hate. The battle lasted only a single night, but by dawn the Cabal of the Black Blade was gone. Their Archon, dead. Their warriors, cut down to the last. Not a single one made it back to Kamara. It was one of the few times in history where an entire Cabal was utterly erased in one engagement. The Drukhari don't trust anyone, and for good reason. If there's one thing more dangerous than fighting them, it's being one of them. Because sooner or later, someone will decide that your position, your power, and your life should belong to them instead. That's exactly what happened to Archon Zelian and her Cabal of the Blades of Desire. At one point, Zelian was one of the most powerful Archons in Kamara. She had alliances with powerful witch cults. Her Cabal controlled one of the greatest gladiatorial arenas, and she had enough slaves, weapons, and resources to challenge even Asdrubal Vect. And that was her mistake. Zelian joined forces with Archon Neos Ilithian of the White Flames and Archon Krylach of the Realm Eternal in a plot to overthrow Vect himself. They even resurrected an ancient tyrant, El Uriak, to aid in their rebellion. But the moment they set their plans in motion, they should have known they were already doomed. Vect didn't just crush them, he tore them apart from the inside. Mysterious assassins killed key lieutenants in their cabals, and sabotaged raids left their forces weakened and exposed. Then came the final move. Vect's agents staged an attack on Krylach's palace, making it look like Zelian had betrayed him. The two allied cabals turned on each other instantly. What should have been a rebellion became a civil war, and by the time Zelian realized the truth, it was too late. Her cabal was shattered. She was defeated, humiliated, and almost killed during a routine combat exercise when her own witch allies turned on her. She had played the greatest game in Kamara and lost. These battles show two sides of the Drukhari Kabals. On one hand, they are nearly unstoppable when they strike from the shadows. The Imperium fears them. Entire civilizations have been wiped from history because of them, and no one in the galaxy is truly safe from their raids. But on the other hand, their greatest enemy will always be themselves. They are masters of war, but they are also prisoners of their own ambition. No matter how powerful an Archon becomes, no matter how many battles they win, there is always someone waiting in the dark, sharpening a knife, ready to take their place. And that's what makes them so terrifying. They will never stop, because the second they do, they die. The Drukhari Kabals are a paradox of power, unstoppable yet fragile, brilliant yet self-destructive. They don't conquer worlds, they break them. They don't wage wars, they turn entire civilizations into feeding grounds. Their strength doesn't come from unity, but from the sheer, unrelenting ambition that fuels their endless cycle of betrayal and bloodshed. The Imperium, Chaos, the Orcs, even the Tyranids, none can truly stop them. Because no matter how many Drukhari you kill, no matter how many Cabals fall, new ones will always rise from the shadows, hungrier and crueler than before. And that's the terrifying truth about them. The Cabals don't need to win. They just need to keep hunting, forever, feeding their dark city with fresh agony. The galaxy may despise them, fear them, try to erase them from history. But as long as there is suffering, as long as there is life to steal, the Cabals of Kamara will never die. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark underbelly of Warhammer 40k, make sure to subscribe for more grimdark lore, forgotten histories, and the most brutal stories the 41st millennium has to offer. There's always more horror lurking in the shadows, and we'll be here to uncover it. See you in the next one.